They're mostly retired engineers, so they know what they're talking about.
Right, we just started now.
Okay, so Energy Realists of Australia.
Yes.
What's this project about?
Well, the Energy Realists of Australia, a group of mostly retired engineers, and a few other people have been wind watching for some time. And our mission is to explain to the government, anybody else, that the wind supply just isn't good enough to do a transition out of coal power until we have a massive expansion of grid-scale storage.
How do you get enough storage of renewable energies?
Well, I think we should work our way up to that after I explain what the basic problem is,
Okay.
which is depicted by the kangaroo on the edge of the cliff.
Yep.
Basically, our energy security is on the edge of a cliff. And the point is that over 10 years we've been closing down coal-fired power stations and not replacing them. And we've now reached the point where if a coal station goes down unexpectedly, or a single generator, as happened in the last 10 days, we're in big trouble with our power supply. The first thing is that the price skyrockets, and 3 times in the last 10 days, Tomago smelter had to partially close down so that the whole of the New South Wales grid wouldn't be compromised.
Interesting.
3 times, and it happened when there was next to no wind, and a generator went out at the Liddell coal-fired power station.
So I understand your point is not against renewable energy, but it's like, it's a bit controversial, but it's interesting to notice how it is too soon to, I guess that is the point. Is it too soon to go through a full transition because there is not yet a way to store energy while basically there is no sun, so during the night or when there are wind droughts?
Yeah, there's no argument against wind and solar power where they work. Okay, so they work very well off-grid in isolated locations where you're not connected to a grid. It might even work for your own home if you think it's worth the investment to put some panels on the roof and generate some of your own power.
They take a lot of maintenance. It's pretty expensive as well.
Well, you just have to do the sums. You just have to weigh up the cost.
Yeah.
It's a bit loaded because it's subsidised, and because you get a feed-in tariff back from the excess power that you produce. That has actually stimulated what you could call a frenzy of solar installation, and we're very proud that we lead the world by a wide margin in the rate of installation of panels on the roof. Way ahead. This is not in just absolute numbers, but in terms of growth.
Wow.
Growth is just, well, because it's subsidised, and you get something back if you inject power into the grid. So it's exploding in quantity.
Well, I guess Australia is the perfect place for it because there's a lot of sun.
Yeah, well, until you get down to Tasmania and a lesser extent Melbourne, there's just great sun everywhere you look, which of course is wonderful in outback locations where there's not a grid. And as for wind power, well, there's places off the grid where it could work to have wind, but of course we're building and we're leading the world with the installation of wind power as well. And this is the point, that the universal narrative right now is that we're building so much solar, so much wind, coal is being driven out of the market, the coal stations are all going to go sooner rather than later, and we'll make a green transition. But as you mentioned, there is a storage problem. So I'd like to work my way through to that because I think we need to, first of all, take on board the possibility that we have a problem.
Okay.
And I'd just like you to envisage like a blacked out city. And there's a picture there of Adelaide. Adelaide blacked out a few years ago. And during that time, it's not like just when the lights go out in your house, you look up the street and you see the other lights are on.
Because the whole city was...
Yeah, it's not even just like your suburb going out because you know that's a local and you can see the lights twinkling in the distance. This was a whole black city and the only lights there are the car lights and the policeman's wand.
When did this happen again?
2017.
And what caused it?
Essentially, it was a grid stability problem. There's been a lot of finger pointing. People point their fingers and say, oh, it was too much renewable energy, and people say, no, it wasn't. I'm not going to buy into that, to what extent the renewable energy caused the problem, but there was a problem, and it can be overcome by brilliantly astute grid management, but that is going to get worse, as I'll explain that.
There must have been a problem, otherwise there would have been not a blackout.
Well, on top of that, windstorms blew over some transmission towers.
Okay.
So it was just a constellation of things that shouldn't happen.
They all happened at the same time.
But they happened at the same time, and they just gave the Adelaide people a bit of a grim warning about what I think, or some of us think, could happen if we keep going down the road of getting rid of our reliable power before the storage is resolved.
Yeah, I think a backup system is never a bad idea, especially when there is not a reliable source of energy in the first place. So again, like I'm interested in the storage problem. It feels like energy is like the amount of energy that is required by a city. Like as you said, in a remote area, it's much easier to install domestic systems of solar or wind, and there are other systems as well. But why do you say it's not scalable, basically, in a grid?
Well, it's because of the very large amount of power that you have in a grid. If you think of the power in a grid like a river that's flowing, it flows and has different depths. It's quite. There's another picture. There's a picture, probably about 4 down. Down. That one.
This one?
Yeah. That's a schematic, a diagram of a 24-hour period, and the line at the top marks the height of the stream of power that's flowing through. So in the middle of the night, it's down at 18 gigawatts of depth. It goes up at breakfast time to the breakfast peak, then it levels off during the day, and it rises at night. Up that particular day would be 25 gigawatts at dinner time. Now, breakfast and dinner times are the key points, or the pinch points, because at that time there's very little, if any, solar power. But the point that you're making, I want to make the point about scaling.
Yes.
Now, there was a massive fanfare 2 or 3 years ago when Elon Musk, he created huge publicity by building the biggest storage battery in the world. And we're very proud of it.
For Tesla.
We're very proud that Elon Musk's Tesla attached to the Hornsdale wind farm in South Australia, just attached to that wind farm. Now, that battery has a capacity just a touch under 200 megawatt hours. That's 200 megawatt hours. So this grid, we're talking about gigawatts, which is thousands of megawatts. And in that day, the amount of gigawatt hours that were flowing through at different depths. It all added up to 284 gigawatt hours. That's 284 megawatt hours. 284,000 megawatt hours. The little box up at the top, which says 1 GWH, that's a little box that represents one
Gigawatt per hour?
Sorry, it's a one
Gigawatt per hour.
Yes, that's 1 gigawatt hour. The little tiny box inside the thing, that one, that's Hornsdale. That's a fifth. That's a fifth of a gigawatt hour. That's right, 200 megawatt hours, fifth of a gigawatt hour. So you can see in proportion to a day's supply of power, or even an hour's supply of power, it's just not in it. To supply the day, you would be looking at, arithmetically, over 1,400 of those Hornsdale plants, and they do not come cheap. The Hornsdale came in two stages and it added up to at least $160 million. So you're getting your storage at roughly in the order of $1 million per megawatt hour.
It's pricey.
So, but of course, people who know the business don't talk about those batteries as bulk storage. They say they're not in the system to do that. They are there for grid stability.
What's grid stability?
Well, when you have injections of intermittent energy, like the sun shines and a cloud goes over, or the wind suddenly gusts and go up, down, that feeds into the grid, and it just creates a problem. The grid has to be kept. The voltage has to be kept in a minute bandwidth, and this random energy coming in creates a huge problem to maintain the stability of the voltage.
So the batteries are used to compensate the voltage when it goes too low, basically.
Yeah. When the wind drops, the battery can almost instantaneously switch power into the circuit. If the wind has, in contrast with anything else like gas turbines or a coal station, the gas turbine can fire up in 15 minutes or 20, but that's a bit late if you've got this gust of power with a. So it's a real balancing act which has been brought upon us by injecting these unreliable, erratic or occasional energies into it.
So it sounds like they would be good as a complement of something else. Like it's not yet sustainable to rely only on not very reliable and stable for sources of energy, basically.
Well, I think the first thing you need to understand is just how much variation there is in the wind supply. Everyone knows the sun goes out at sunset. That's not a mystery, although you may know that in Spain they're generating power at night for a while by shining lamps onto the panels, because the feed-in tariff they got for the power was worth more than the diesel that they fueled the lights. So
wow,
obviously that was put in. They stopped that when they found out what was going on. But okay, generally speaking, if you're not illuminating the panels artificially, you don't get solar power at night. So that means as the coal stations close, the wind has to pick up the burden. The wind has to be become a primary provider.
How consistent is wind in wind farms?
Well, there's good news and bad news, Francesco. The good news is that the Australian Energy Marketing Operator, initials AEMO, they have kept records for 10 years. It's something like almost minute by minute of the power that's been coming in from every registered generator. And every wind farm is a registered generator. And incidentally, every turbine in a coal station, like the four at Liddell, they're four registered generators. So we have a minutely accurate and continuous record of the input from every wind farm and every other generator. So if we go, and the second picture there, sorry, the third picture. The third picture,
Oh, the one above.
no, I'm sorry, that one, okay. This one, that's the wind produced by all of the wind farms in southeast Australia over a period of a month. And at the top, that's 100% of the power they could produce if it was ideal conditions. The wind was going just the right, good high speed.
Maximum efficiency.
Maximum efficiency. There's a wrinkle there that when it gets too high, they have to turn off or they'll fly apart. But okay, you want them to be nice and high and at the optimum, almost 100%. This particular month, you can see that they only cleared 60% once or twice. I'll put a line down the bottom at 10%, and I describe, just for working purposes, I regard anything under 10% as a wind drought. And you can draw the line where you like, and it doesn't matter where, but the point is that at that level, there's effectively next to no wind. So in other words, next to no wind power being generated. So you can expect over a year to get 30%, but frequently it is very much less.
And ideally, I guess you would want maximum wind efficiency overnight to compensate for the sun, right? But there is no way of like having any control over that.
Well, precisely. One thing you know is that the solar power won't be there at night. That's the only thing you know.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Wind is unpredictable.
It is. I mean, you've got records. One thing that's predictable is when a high pressure system comes through, the wind is going to be very low. If you watch the weather news religiously, there's sort of circles of high and low systems, and they move across the continent. And if a high pressure system sits there for a while, then that is a wind drought period. Now, one of our pioneer wind watchers, called Paul Miskelly, he wrote a paper in 2012 based on the records of the time, and he counted the number of days in the year when there was next to no wind, and it was a pretty scary number. Now, it's a scary number if you think about having to survive on wind. The point about being on the edge of the cliff is that it's only now, as we approach the closure of the next coal-fired power station, it's only now that it starts to matter whether the wind blows and whether the sun shines. Up to date, it could shine or not shine, it could blow or not blow. The power's there, 100% reliability. Now we have to wonder what is going to happen. Well, how many repetitions of last week's crisis, closing down the smelter, prices skyrocketing. This could be a regular scenario in after 2 years' time when the whole of Liddell closes down rather than just one generator.
I don't think that it would be a wise idea to. I don't know what the government plan is, but I don't think it would be a wise idea to get rid of reliable sources of energy until we reach a point in which it's actually sustainable to rely on natural forms of energy. I guess my question is there anything else besides wind and solar that could supplement the necessary amount of energy?
Well, to state the bleeding obvious, it's nuclear. Um,
I think
thanks-
Australia is not really pro-nuclear, is it?
Well, there was an immensely successful worldwide campaign in the 1970s and 80s, and I've read a book about that. It was worldwide, very carefully orchestrated, and massive misinformation was promoted. The Teachers' Federation, the Teachers' Unions in Australia were in the forefront of this campaign. They actually distributed blatantly false information to school children in the 1970s.
What kind of false information?
Well, saying it's dangerous, it's not safe. We'll all be killed.
Huh.
The French, of course, have been running their nuclear power for 70 years, and it provides 70 or 80% of their power.
Most countries, like Japan, has nuclear. America has nuclear. I think nuclear was ranked one of the actually most secure form of energies. The problem was not in terms of safety, rather disposing of the nuclear waste.
Well, that's another area where Australia could make billions, tens of billions, taking on board the world's waste and disposing of it in our very stable old strata.
What's the way of disposing of nuclear waste?
Well, someone said you just can put it in a shed with a roof over it and put a fence around to keep people out of it.
Maybe the outback or something.
Well, precisely. That was put to me seriously. You need to guard it. The other thing is to sink it deep in the ground, in deep, stable strata, and that's it. And we could do that. We could have a dedicated port and railway station off into the outback, and be the world's waste repository.
Is there a limit to that? Like, to what extent that can be done? Because it sounds like the same problem with plastic and garbage in general. Like, just reminds me of the concept of landfills. Like, eventually, how deep is this pit need to be?
Well, the nuclear waste, it's about on the scale of the Hornsdale battery compared with all the other waste.
Okay.
Well, in fact, much smaller. It just doesn't rate as a space problem, a problem of bulk. It doesn't rate. The other thing is nowadays that it's not these days that the waste can be used for nuclear weapons. That used to be a massive fear before, that the spent rods could apparently be used for warlike purposes. Now that they can't. But the debate was sort of lost 50 years ago, and that fear and loathing has sunk so deep into the Greens and parts of the Labor Party, and maybe wider than that. So, mind you, the tide's turning. It's being talked about. I think there might be statistics on a growing acceptance. But actually, I don't want to go on about. It's not my field. I've just decided there's other people in the energy realists are looking after that. I'm
focusing on nuclear.
Well, they're watching it, but of course nothing will happen until it becomes legal, and then it'll take about 10 years to find a site after you get over all the objections that'll be raised, and then it'll take 10 years to build a facility. So I've let other people can worry about that. I want to focus on the wind. I'm one of the wind watchers in the team.
What is a wind? What's the definition of a wind watcher?
Well, that's my joke, I guess. But Paul Muskelly was an early wind watcher. He did his first study in 2012. His son has set up a site which takes the data from the AEMO and produces very user-friendly displays so that you can monitor whatever you want to know about the wind and other sources of power.
Interesting.
And one more. There's a man, a retired engineer, electrical engineer. His screen name is Anton Lang, and he has been watching diligently for probably 4 years, not quite as long as Paul Miskelly, but Paul Miskelly is retired. This guy's a complete amateur. He does this on his own bat, and he has a completely comprehensive record, and he's particularly analysed the ups and downs. And one of the papers in our series of briefing papers that we produced is his report on the number of times over a 2-year period when the wind dropped, say, 500 megawatts, which is like a generator in a coal station going out. Now, if generators in coal stations went out more than a few times a year, that would be absolute scandal. It would be front page news. These wind plants, the wind supply is going up and down that much, dozens of times a year or more. But nobody takes any notice.
Interesting.
Except him and us.
So after all of this wind watching, what's the what comes out of it? Like, what's your main overview of the whole energy scenario?
Well, I guess the message I want people to take away is be aware of wind droughts. Be aware of the longest wind drought in that month was 33 hours.
That's quite long.
Well, that's the point. There were 33, 18, 16, 12 and 9-hour wind droughts in that month. Now, of course, the people who defend wind power, they say, well, look, you're cherry picking. You're picking out a bad month just deliberately to make it look bad.
But even if this was the worst month in history, you still don't want to be experiencing no energy for 30 hours anyway. So there must be a system in place that can supplement for that, right?
Well, just to nail that point down home, because you've hit on it, and that's another picture to show that. It's what I call the flood levee, the flood levee story. And when you build a flood levee, if there's a gap, the water gets in. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how high the high bits are. If there's a gap, it stops being a defence. It just becomes a wall with a gap in it. Similarly, imagine a city wall or a castle wall to repel barbarians. Now, normally they'll come with ladders to climb up the wall, but if they find there's a hole,
they would just go in.
It's like the floodwaters, they'll just come in through the hole. So, similarly with the wind, it's the low points of the wind supply that kill the grid.
What's the solution?
Well, I just want to nail it down a bit further. Can we bring up another picture, the one with it's probably the second one. No, it's the second last one. Third one. Third one. This is the city wall, the flood levee and the wind power. The top line, you think of the top line as the installed capacity of all of our windmills. Then below that there's the average, which is 30%. So you can see you can keep building and building and building, and the average rises and rises. But at the lowest point, which can be as low as 1 or 2%, that's so low, and it stays it doesn't rise, it just stays there. So you can have as much installed capacity as you like. At the very lowest level of the wind supply, there's no effective supply of wind power. Nothing, and I suspect that our state authorities that are making grand schemes to build renewable energy zones and replace the coal stations, I think they're using that 30% average. I think they think if we just build 3 times as much as we need, say, then we end up with enough. But you can just see from those 3 lines, you can build and build and build, but at the lowest level, you're still in big trouble. Just
Yeah.
How far can you transport energy? Because my question, I guess, is if you're experiencing wind droughts in, let's say, South Australia, but there must be another wind farm somewhere else that is actually like producing energy. So can they work together in a way?
well, this was the thing. This was what Paul Miskelly just found, that these high pressure systems create low wind across the whole of southeast Australia. So this is what the wind people thought. They were confident or hoped that if we kept building, we would get to the point that you're describing, where if there's enough spread around, there will be wind somewhere or other, and you transport it. And that's why one of the three things in what I call the holy trinity of solutions to the wind drought problem, one of them is transmission lines to take wind power from places where they've got it to places where they haven't.
So a grid.
Through the grid. Well, it involves building a lot of very expensive additional interconnectors, as they call them. But the problem is when the wind drought is across the whole of the southeast, as in that case they all were. That was the whole. That wasn't one state we were looking at or one wind farm. That was all the wind farms in southeastern Australia. So the transmission line system isn't going to solve the problem. The second of the three is batteries. So that's number two, the batteries. Well, we've written off the batteries.
Because they don't supply storage. They just used to stabilize.
Yep. Now the third is pumped hydro.
What's that?
Pumped hydro. Now, in routine hydro or straight downhill hydro, you run water from a dam at a high level through turbines to generate the power, and the water runs away down into for irrigation purposes. In a pumped hydro scheme, you have a reservoir at the bottom or a dam at the bottom, and you pump it back to the top.
Okay.
So what you have is the scenario, and we've got a scheme called the Snowy 2, which is a pumped hydro scheme. It was Prime Minister Turnbull's great initiative to mobilise as a national emergency to do Snowy 2. And Snowy 2, in principle, it's designed to receive input from wind farms and solar farms, but you need about all of the wind farms we've got at present. So we need to build a whole lot more to match what we've got at present, and dedicate them to pumping water at Snowy 2. So we've got say 8 gigawatts of wind power. So that's going to be pumping water for Snowy 2, but you lose 30 or 40% of the power that you've generated in the pumping and other transmission losses. And so having pumped it up, you then run it down and you get a more or less stable supply of power for a certain period of time. Now, people are building models of this to see just how effective it will be, and it looks as though this scheme, at a cost of $10 or $12 billion or so, and the cost of a great deal of damage in the Kosciuszko National Park, this could conceivably almost match one of our larger coal-fired power stations. So, but the problem is you replace one of them, but then where do you put 8 or 9 more Snowy 2s? Now, the next device is small-scale pumped hydro, which is where you don't have a gigantic scheme like Snowy 2 that's generating maybe 2 gigawatts of output, which is real output. You have dozens and dozens or hundreds of little ones. Now, I think this is sort of like crazy, but there are people in universities who do models and they do survey the landscape and they find hundreds of sites that are suitable, they say are suitable for small solar, small pumped hydro. Well, I can only say believe that when you see it. But we're a long way off getting Snowy 2. I believe small-scale pumped hydro when I see it. And in the meantime, we're back to where do we go from here if we keep closing down coal stations.
I also think one of the major problems is that the amount of energy required by society in general is exponentially growing, because there are a lot of things that like keep using energy. For instance, as simple as electric cars, they need to be charged, and the more they become popular, the more electricity is going to be required. But another thing that was brought to my attention the other day was cryptocurrencies and the unbelievable amount of energy that they require to be operational compared to how like the same number of operations managed by normal currencies is exponentially higher. So the whole humanity is going into a direction where like the energy supply is the energy required to run everything that we're doing is growing a lot. And where is this energy gonna come from?
Well, if you look at the developing world, where the Chinese are busy helping people build nuclear power stations and coal-fired power stations.
Where are the Chinese building nuclear stations?
Well, I don't have the list at my fingertips, but they have quite a number numerous in China itself, but also in other places. But the real action is in coal stations. They're building coal stations all over the place because the developing countries, they want power and they want it reliable and they want it in bulk.
In which countries there is coal stations besides Australia and America, I think?
Oh, well, practically every country has them, but not every country is building them. And like Australia's not, America's not. But I think we probably talked long enough for most people's concentration, Francisco, but I just wanted to convey another picture, which is how far we've actually got. First on the cryptocurrencies, that was a good one to finish off with. I was intrigued to read a couple of years ago that the cryptocurrencies were using as much power as the Republic of Ireland. But I read this week they were using half as much power as the whole of Great Britain.
Wow.
And that's, as you say, exponential growth. It beats me, but then...
They're developing ways to make it more efficient and like taking less resources. But I was reading, I didn't double check, so I'm not sure if it's accurate or if it's like just misinformation. But I was reading a tweet that like Tesla was, they made a communication that they like were stopped investing in Bitcoin because of like environmental concerns due to like the high amount of energy required. I'm not sure. I need to verify.
Yeah, I was only watching out of the corner of my eye, so I don't have the full story on that. Someone else in the Energy Realists probably does. But what I wanted to get to was a very vivid picture to show how far we've got, or how far Britain has got, for all of their efforts to replace coal with wind and solar. So if we bring up that pie chart, second last one. So this is UK primary energy consumption. A third of that is electricity. So when you're talking about power, we mostly talk about electricity, but that's only a third of the whole of the country's power consumption. But if you look into there, you have to look very hard to find the blue bit, which is wind, solar and hydro.
Oh, that one, yeah.
4%. So they've got their coal down to 3% from whatever it was, but you can see there's a. You see what prospect do you see they're going to replace the rest of that pie with, expand that little 4% wedge, right?
What's bio?
Now I'm glad. Oh, that was a brilliant question because I was just about to tell you what bio is. Where's bio?
10% green.
Yeah. Now bio. You really need to see Michael Moore's documentary movie Planet of the Humans.
Oh yeah.
That tells you about bio. Basically, in bulk, it's clear felling forests in North and South America to wood chip them and ship them across the ocean to burn in furnaces in Europe in lieu of coal.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's an environmental debacle
Yeah.
for wildlife and forests. So that's bio. It makes your heart bleed to see that film. So I just wanted to encourage people actually to leave them with something to do. I want people to go away and Google up NemWatch widget. NEMWATCH, NemWatch widget, WIDGET. The NemWatch widget brings up, just gives you those bar charts.
Oh yeah. Can we see the bar charts?
Pick up the bar charts. You can if you bring up the widget and you just glance at it. Glance at it at breakfast time and glance at it at dinner time. Just to remind yourself or brief yourself or find out how much the wind is contributing to your hot breakfast or your morning coffee or your hot dinner, or for that matter for your air conditioning or your cooler. Just check, just be alert to what the widget tells you about the wind supply.
Interesting.
We have a question from a viewer actually.
Yeah.
What's the question?
So this one is from Marco. He is asking, he heard that there's an idea to install tons of solar panels in Sahara Desert in order to produce an extraordinary amount of energy for the whole world. Do you think this idea can be achieved?
It all comes down to storage, doesn't it?
Well, and transmission lines as well. I mean,
yeah.
you don't have to go to the Sahara. You could do it in Australia.
Yeah.
There's plenty of outback areas. No, it really comes down to the capacity to have the transmission lines to take it somewhere useful, and also the storage to keep you going through the night when it's not coming through fresh.
It reminds me of the same problem of like back in the days, decades ago, when they were trying to find a way to take advantage of like energy coming from lightnings. And the problem is storage again.
Yeah, well, that'd be a good. It's a wonder they're not trying to do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, there's another image I wanted to leave you with. In addition to the widget, I want people to get familiar with the widget. But just on the theme of storage, I wanted to leave you with this image of the horse and cart. Here we have the cart before the horse. This came from a Dutchman, actually, a Dutchman, and a jolly Dutchman. He has a great sense of humour in his writing. Or it's just a machine translation that makes it human. Anyway, the point is, his point is, get the storage organised first and then start generating massive quantities. He also thinks about reconsidering nuclear. So we are leading the world in building capacity, which is kind of the horse, but we've got no cart.
Yeah, we need definitely more storage, but it's something that is being developed. The problem is that the timing. I don't know enough about nuclear to have an opinion on that, but definitely batteries are a big issue, and also The problem with batteries, I think it's about the technology. Like lithium is a scarce resource, and it's limited.
Well, they'll find more of it. I mean, this is one of the things that we do well. We find more of stuff when we want it. But I think I don't want to be too optimistic about that because we're going to need such a great deal of it.
Yeah.
We're going to need to go down that route that people envisage with everyone driving electric cars. We're looking at thousands of times the production of current production, and there's a whole environmental nightmare unravelling or unveiling when you look down the upstream and downstream chain of development of renewable energy. You have children mining rare earths in the Congo. You have, at the one end of the chain, you have massive amounts of overburden has to be removed to get, as you say, limited quantities of lithium. All of this has to be done with high-powered petrol, diesel burning machines.
Yeah.
And you put the things up in the field or you put them on the roof, then they wear out, and we're just starting to experience the first wave of worn-out wind turbines, and we'll soon be getting the first wave of worn-out solar panels. And
are you supposed to dispose of worn-out solar panels?
Well, I'd have to get one of my team to talk to you about that, but it's not a pretty story. They do contain toxic materials. So that is that's a topic for
another conversation. Yeah. Okay, this was interesting. Thank you very much, Rafe. And good night.
Good night, all. Yeah, I thought